All right, so Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson is currently undergoing her Senate confirmation hearings, and she has been facing just an absolutely massive wave of some of the dumbest questions you could possibly imagine, mostly coming from Republicans. And I got one here for you guys from Senator John Cornyn of Texas, who basically got offended at the fact that he thought that she had previously identified accurately George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, who was known as the architect of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, war criminals. Okay, so let's just go ahead and watch this clip.
Just ask, I don't know you well, but I've been impressed by our interaction, and you've been gracious and charming. Why in the world would you call Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld and George W. Bush war criminals in a legal filing? It seems so out of character for you.
Senator, you may have been are you talking about briefs that or habeas petitions that I filed?
Talking about when you were representing a member of the Taliban, and the Department of Defense identified him as an intelligence officer for the Taliban, and you referred to the Secretary of Defense and the sitting President of the United States as war criminals. Why would you do something like that? It seems so out of character.
Well, Senator, I don't remember that particular reference, and I was representing my clients and making arguments. I'd have to take a look at what you meant. I did not intend to disparage the president or the Secretary of Defense.
Well, being a war criminal has huge ramifications. You could be subject to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court and hauled before that international tribunal and tried for war crimes. So it's not a casual comment, I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's not a casual thing to just throw around there. And yes, you would, in theory at least, have to be hauled off to The Hague or wherever this war tribunal would be taking place. Of course, you would have to face those consequences, but that would be a good thing because they are fucking war criminals. And listen, this is a huge, missed opportunity. Obviously, she's trying to become a Supreme Court nominee, so she's not going to call previous or sitting U.S. presidents war criminals. You understand why she's, fearful in that sense, I guess. But also, at the same time, you're attempting to be a Supreme Court justice, right? You're supposed to be a representative of the highest, a representation of law and order within the United States. You should be able to call war criminals because all you would have to do is go and look at the classifications and the definition, which we're about to do here, from the ICC and the International Criminal Court, and look at the definition of what a war criminal is, and then simply match that up to what U.S. presidents have done. And it's not just Donald Rumsfeld, the architect of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, or George W. Bush, same applies to him. It's not just them, it's every sitting U.S. president from since World War II, arguably, or even before then. And I'm going to leave you guys off at the end of this with a quote from Noam Chomsky, who basically says the same thing. But, at the end of the day, this is something that shouldn't be controversial, right? If you're going to, as Joe Biden just did a couple of days ago, come out and call Vladimir Putin a war criminal for what he's doing right now in Ukraine, which I would and I have called him a war criminal, that's an accurate description of what he's doing. He's bombing civilian infrastructure, he's wantonly killing innocent men, women, and children, right? Committing widespread war crimes and human rights abuses left and right. But if you're going to be able to call Vladimir Putin that for what he's doing in Ukraine right now, you should be able to point out the same thing, arguably 10 times over, for George W. Bush and the destruction that he wrought in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that, other presidents have done all over the world for decades now. So this shouldn't be a controversial statement. Now, on the specifics of what he's talking about here, it turns out he was actually wrong, and she did not, in fact, in her career, directly call these presidents war criminals, but they did give a little bit of a explainer down here, which I think emphasizes the point of how ridiculous it is that we're, tiptoeing around accurately calling them war criminals, because listen to the justification that Dick Durbin, a Democrat here, gives for basically trying to, clear her name in this sense and try to, portray it as if she didn't actually call them war criminals. So here's what he had to say.
Against the United States, naming former President Bush and former Secretary Rumsfeld in their official capacities. You were advocating on behalf of individuals who argued they were civilians wrongly classified as enemy combatants of the United States, and your filing was part of your professional responsibility to zealously advocate for your clients. In those petitions, the individuals raised more than a dozen claims for relief, one of which was an allegation that the government had sanctioned torture against the individuals which constituted war crimes under the Alien Tort Statute. The Alien Tort Statute allows courts to hear cases for alleged violations of the law of nations or the treaties of the United States. Apparently, this is what Senator Cornyn was referencing. So to be clear, there was no time where you called President Bush or Secretary Rumsfeld a, quote, war criminal, close quote. Did you want
Correct,
to respond?
Senator. No,
Okay.
thank you. That was correct.
Okay, so again, did you hear what he just said? I mean, he literally just laid out, okay, so there were members of the Taliban or whatever, terrorists that we were trying to put on trial here in the United States, or whether it's in Guantanamo Bay, where people have been denied the right to a trial, denied basic, rights that we should be having under the law right now. He's basically pointing out the CIA and Bush administration run torture programs that we did have in place, okay? And he's using that specific detail that was put forward in one of these cases as an argument from one of these, Taliban members or whoever it was, and he's using that as if it's like somehow clearing her name here and identifying them as war criminals. Well, hang on a second. The CIA torture programs in Iraq and Afghanistan, those were real things. That did happen, okay? George W. Bush did sanction torture. So what are you talking about here as if that's some sort of a made-up thing that never happened, okay? We just had a story drop that I unfortunately didn't get to cover on this channel. We just had a story drop just a couple days ago that was a declassified document from, I think, 2008 that was basically pointing out that the CIA was using people, okay, prisoners, as literal training props while they were giving CIA agents practice, essentially, in their torture techniques, okay? They were using human beings who they had detained as training props, okay, to practice their various torture mechanisms that they were using, okay? This is not a secret. This is not, unfortunately, it's not, or thankfully, it's not a secret anymore, but this is not something that's like hidden. This is something that all of these people are aware of that did verifiably happen and is arguably still happening around the world today. We don't know about, obviously a lot of what the CIA is doing right now, but also the current sitting president who's nominating you to the Supreme Court could also be accurately called a war criminal for multiple different reasons, but this was just the most recent one. No U.S. troops will be punished for deadly Kabul strike, Pentagon chief decides. The military initially defended the strike, they lied about it, which killed 10 civilians, including 7 children, but ultimately called it a tragic mistake. So this was the drone strike as we were leaving Afghanistan, basically that the Pentagon came out and not only lied about, but bragged about and said it was a mission success. Later we found out that it wasn't an ISIS suicide bomber as they had initially told us, but it was in fact 10 innocent civilians, including 7 children. They obliterated a family. They wiped an innocent family off the face of the earth, and nobody got punished for it. Okay, not even just not dragged off to The Hague, but you didn't get punished for it at all. There was no accountability, no review of our drone strike programs or anything like that. They just completely ignored it and whitewashed it and glossed over it as if this doesn't deserve punishment or accountability. And another interesting thing here, if you guys don't know about the Hague Invasion Act, go and Google it real quick. But under George W. Bush, okay, in the wake of this, build up to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, etc., they passed a law that literally said that if an American soldier or an American general or official was brought to The Hague to be put on trial, that we reserve the right to invade The Hague to liberate those people from that trial. Okay, so just to give you a perspective in terms of how completely averse to accountability the U.S. empire is and has historically been for decades now, okay, just go look up the Hague Invasion Act. So just completely ridiculous. But when we get down to it, what is the actual definition of a war criminal? Okay, so here from the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, they say the court shall have jurisdiction in respect to war crimes, in particular when committed as part of a plan or policy or as part of a large-scale commission of such crimes. And they say war crimes means grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions of the 12th of August of 1949, namely any of the following acts against persons or property protected under the provisions relevant to the Geneva Convention. And they say, number 1, willful killing. Yes, you could apply that to George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld. Torture or inhumane treatment, including biological experiments. You could definitely apply torture and inhumane treatment, again, to the Bush administration. Willfully causing great suffering or serious injury to body or health. Yes, again, extensive destruction and appropriation of property not justified by military necessity and carried out unlawfully and wantonly. Yes, we completely destroyed and obliterated civilian infrastructure in both Afghanistan and Iraq that led to countless deaths because people couldn't get access to electricity. There were food shortages, especially on top of the U.S. sanctions that we had deployed in the 90s and after that completely put a stranglehold on the people of Iraq, killed hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians just with our sanctions alone, but again, destroyed civilian infrastructure, compelling a prisoner of war or other protected person to serve in the forces of a hostile power, willfully depriving a prisoner of war or other protected persons of the right to a fair and regular trial. Again, we currently have Guantanamo Bay. Okay, Guantanamo Bay still exists right now. Just a couple months ago, I saw the New York Times doing a fluff piece on Guantanamo Bay as if it's some magic little land where U.S. soldiers get to go and they have this cool little neat McDonald's on the property, etc. It's literally a torture camp, okay? We are still operating Guantanamo Bay. It still has not been shut down. These people are being deprived of a right to a fair trial, and part of the largest reason why they're still being deprived of an actual trial is because none of the fucking evidence that we have against them would be admissible in a trial because it was used by, we got this evidence against them using torture techniques, okay? So again, war crimes, but they continue saying unlawful deportation or transfer or unlawful confinement and taking of hostages. So again, a vast majority of these could apply to both Donald Rumsfeld and George W. Bush and Barack Obama and Joe Biden and, H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, and you can go down the line, which brings me to my, final point here as outlined by Noam Chomsky years ago, okay? So he says, if the Nuremberg laws were applied, then every post-war American president would have been hanged, he's talking about World War II, by violation of the Nuremberg laws. I mean the same kind of crimes for which people were hanged in Nuremberg, and Nuremberg means Nuremberg and Tokyo. So first of all, you've got to think back to what people were hanged for at Nuremberg and Tokyo, and once you think back, the question doesn't even require a moment's waste of time. For example, one general at the Tokyo trials, which were the worst, General Yamashita, was hanged on the grounds that troops in the Philippines, which were technically under his command, though it was so late in the war that he had no contact with them, it was at the very end of the war, and there were some troops running around the Philippines who he had no contact with, and they had carried out atrocities, so he was hanged. Well, try that one out, and you've already wiped out everybody, meaning you've already wiped out every U.S. president since World War II, and you could even arguably go back further than that. So he's 100% right, and listen, it's disappointing, obviously, to see her blow an opportunity like that and not just simply accurately characterize them as the war criminals that they are, but, it does kind of undercut your ability as a Supreme Court justice to pretend as if, you have an actual real interpretation of the law here, because the international law is very, clear on this. It's not ambiguous. It's not vague. If any people on the face of the planet right now were to be prosecuted for war crimes and could be accurately called war criminals, it would be Donald Rumsfeld and George W. Bush and other motherfuckers like Henry Kissinger, who's still somehow alive. I think he has some, secret, magic spell over him that's going to keep him immortal forever. But, all of these people are verified war criminals. So why is it so hard to just say that out loud? Why is it so hard? Why are we pretending to get offended?